Hello everyone. We're going to be looking at, during this lecture, this idea of engaging students in learning through small groups, questions, role-playing, and simulations. I'll be teaching out of a textbook during this lecture. However, I'll go ahead and I'll go ahead and pop up an article that we will discuss at a later time during the lecture. What we're looking at with engaging students in learning through small groups, questions, role-playing is, now that we understand how to build plans, we're now wanting to understand how we can engage our students and have them work harder during times that lecture can kind of get boring sometimes, so we may not be as motivated as we want to be. So at that point, what we're looking at is how can we do differentiated instruction or different types of instruction to allow students to become motivated. When you're planning exciting and challenging social studies lessons and units, teachers, such as yourself, have an assortment of effective tools at their disposal. So you have many tools that you can use whenever you're wanting to create an interesting lesson. One idea is the idea of grouping students for learning, also known as cooperative learning. Groups such as committees, teams, and social organizations play a major role in our society. In schools, placing students into groups for instructional purposes has a very long history. Traditionally, teachers and administrators have assigned students of all ages to groups to achieve a variety of cognitive and affective objectives. These include completing tasks efficiently, encouraging tolerance and appreciation of diversity, enabling interest exploration, and providing greater opportunities for in-depth discussions. Structured group settings that include diversity also afford students an opportunity for social dialogues that can stimulate cognitive growth. They offer the promise of environments where youngsters can explore alternative perspectives, develop new insights, and modify prior knowledge. When people with different goals, roles, and resources interact, the differences in interpretation provide occasions for the construction of new knowledge. So we see at this point that group work is very strong in tradition. It occurs a lot and has occurred for many years. And if done correctly, students will be able to enjoy the lecture and learn more than they would traditionally learn in just a basic lecture format. So how does a teacher plan for small group work? If you're going to do group work, how should you plan this? Before organizing students into small groups, teachers should consider a number of basic issues. These issues include adequate space and sound control, and avoiding potential distractions. Teachers should also vary grouping techniques to prevent boredom. As a further critical consideration, you need to determine the optional size of a group in relation to the objective that you're wanting to teach. So usually, sometimes teachers will say, let's group according to alphabetical order. A, B, C's are together. Or let's just go down the row and, 1, 2, 3. So you definitely want to plan out your group. So the first thing you want to look at is what size you want your group to be. And the second, of course, would be how do you want to create your groups. Groups may be as small as 2 members or as large as a whole class. There is no magic number in determining the optimal size of a small group. Although 4 to 6 students is a good general rule of thumb for many social studies activities, groups of 3 should be avoided since the configuration always makes possible 2 against 1 or odd person out. So you want to avoid a group of 3 because 2 people might team up against 1, and that idea may not come to surface. Members of a group must also be capable of assuming or experimenting with the roles they are to play within the group if the group is to function effectively. A simple example is the role of recorder or scribe. This is a job or a group that many of y'all probably had to do. They were like, okay, who wants to be the recorder? Who wants to take notes? Usually the recorder requires some basic writing, organizing, and reading skills. Students need to practice and experiment with different types of groups and alternate roles within them. In addition to the recorder role that many have been aware of, there's also roles such as timekeeper, encourager, and daily leader are needed. Now, as a teacher, you should be able to do the following. You should set up scenarios that model the behavior expectations for each of the specific roles before students are asked to work in the groups. This allows the students to understand the expectations for each job within a group and more easily perform up to the expectations. So if you know what is expected of you, instead of we're going to need a recorder, if you know what's expected of you, then you will be able to perform at your task. Effective group activities also require as a prerequisite that students possess a number of basic social skills. So that's a very key point that we need to discuss. If you want to be in a group, you must be able to function in a society. So, for example, if you have a classroom that may be lacking some social skills, then you need to address those social skills before you attempt a group, or you should abandon the group of a principal altogether. What social skills are we looking for? Social skills such as listening and paying attention. Students are expected to be able to listen attentively in their groups, taking turns and sharing participation time, working quietly, sharing ideas, asking for information and explanations, being polite, accepting and valuing others' ideas, sharing roles and responsibilities. Group members can be picked in several different ways. So now that you understand that your students should have some social skills and you are now ready to create a group, let's see how we should select our groups. Students can do what's called self-selection, where they choose their own groups, random assignment, assignment by backgrounds, assignment by special abilities or skills, assignment by behavioral characteristics, or assignment by special interest. Aside from student self-selection, the other procedures I mentioned involve some teacher decisions that you're going to need to make. You must assess how certain student characteristics are related to the task and effective operation of the group. Although there is no one way to identify group members, there are better ways for different objectives. So there's no one way to select them. But you should think about this whenever you're designing your group project. For instance, consider an activity in which one of the objectives is to improve the level of multicultural understanding within a classroom. Assign a general background to include a mix of racial or ethnic representatives within each group is likely to be a better choice than student self-selection. Similarly, consider a class where a number of behavior problems exist. So you've got one of those classrooms that your students are causing a lot of trouble in. An important grouping consideration for some may be to ensure that potential disruptive students are not grouped together. And this is something that happens a lot. Maybe we shouldn't group our bad students together. So student self-selection may not be a good idea in that case. So we now have an idea of how we should select our students and how that should be done. We now have an idea of the social skills that are needed for group projects. So we can decide how we want to select our groups, and that's that. That's up to you. But you really need to put some thought into that, how you want to select your groups. This will give you an example whenever you observe a teacher teaching. If you're an administrator or if you're going to be a mentor teacher, sometimes they'll think, well, a new teacher will think, I'm going to do some group work to really impress my mentor. And you're sitting there and you watch them, they'll say, okay, everyone get in groups. Well, at that point, watch the groups. Now, that's okay. Student selection is okay if every student gets in their own group. But watch the groups. If there's a disruptive group or a group where the students cause a lot of trouble, then that may not have been a good idea to do. So that's something you may want to talk to your teacher about. Say, hey, I noticed you let student selection occur, and that one group in the back, they seemed kind of disruptive. And they seemed to kind of, two of the students really caused a lot of trouble, and that was something that we didn't like. Also, you have three, and two of the students were very disruptive, and they kind of bullied the third one into not being able to make any answers. So that would be something you'd want to address with that person. Aside from size and composition of the membership, there are other considerations in using small groups for social studies instruction. Certain group techniques can have multi-purpose applications since they have flexible designs and are not tied to any particular set of objectives. So we're going to look at now some things that we can do, some techniques we can do in our groups that no matter what size our groups are and no matter what our objectives are, could come into play. So a little bit of a bag of tricks. So Microsoft, looking up there, we'll just type these out real quick. One of these is known as brainstorming. Brainstorming is an effective technique when the objective of a group is to generate as many different solutions to a problem as possible for consideration. So when you're wanting multiple solutions. The main ingredient for a brainstorming session is a potentially solvable problem. So we're looking at a problem that can be solved. For example, how can we get rid of a national debt? Or how can we diminish global warming? A brainstorming session requires a leader to guide the discussion. A recorder is also needed to list on a large paper or on the board the possible solutions that the group members generate. The ground rules are that all ideas must be accepted and recorded without evaluation. Once all ideas have been recorded quickly without comment, they can be discussed. As a final step, the group members can try to agree which one of the most useful solutions. So, your boss has decided, we'll do an example here. Your boss has decided there's an issue with the lunchroom. And the lunchroom has, there's just too many students in the lunchroom. And it's creating a big problem. So he says, okay, y'all, let's have a brainstorming session where we decide what we're going to do. Okay. Well, that's really a solvable solution. If you can't solve it, then there's a problem with the whole fundamental premise of school. So the lunchroom can be solved. So he gets everyone in the room, and he's, I'm going to be the leader of this meeting, and what I would like now are some ideas. Now, at this moment, he's going to look across the room. He's going to say, who would like to be the recorder? So he picks a recorder, and he says, your job is to write down all the ideas on the board or a sheet of paper. So y'all do. You stand in front of the library, and there you are writing the ideas. And someone makes the suggestion. They raise their hand, and they say, how about we have 2 lunchrooms, 2 lunch periods? So the rule is no one can say, that's a stupid idea. Everyone writes it down. The recorder writes it down. And then someone says, well, how about we have more teachers on duty during lunch? So they put that idea down. So the brainstorming is to make sure all the ideas are posted in the order that they are brought up. Then, if time permits, and it should, you all discuss the ideas. Everyone says, well, why was that an idea? Well, I felt that if we post that, if we brought more teachers on board, then that would make some of the causes of the problems. Well, at that point, another teacher might say, that is a good idea. However, more teachers would involve more time away from class, or teachers it would mess up their schedules. So you would have a gentleman's discussion concerning topic. Your leader may say, she may say, well, this is a good idea, or this is not a good idea. But then you would discuss it and then decide which way the group would lean towards. Now, this does not mean a brainstorming session should produce one solution. It would be ideal if this would happen. However, sometimes the brainstorming idea produces multiple solutions, and that is then presented to the person who makes the final decision. If I'm speaking abstract for you, I will make an example real life. The Bay of Pigs was in Cuba. Cuba was 90 miles south of the United States. You all know this because you're all history teachers. The Bay of Pigs was our attempt to overrun Castro, to overthrow him. Well, it failed. Well, after the Bay of Pigs, we discovered that the Soviets were putting nuclear missiles in Cuba. And this became known as the Cuban Missile Crisis. So the Soviets were putting missiles 90 miles from our shore, which would pretty much mess up all of our early warning systems. We would not be able to have any kind of respond if they launched anything. And it swayed the balance of power dramatically over towards the Russians. So we really couldn't allow that. At this point, JFK, President Kennedy, decided to create a brainstorming commission of some of the smartest men and women in the world, and they sat down at a table, I think at the Pentagon, and they had to create a solution. Now, he did have one charge for them, and that was the charge that it had to be unanimous. So they would say, what can we do? And the solution finally came out to, one was like, let's bomb Cuba, first strike, let's do this, let's do that. And the solution came, let's blockade Cuba. Because blockade was an act of war, the consensus then said that if you do blockade, it would have to be approved by all the countries in America, North and South America. So that would be an example of brainstorming, but then it would be an example of our next type of technique we can use, consensus decision-making. Now, consensus decision-making is when you tell a group that they must brainstorm an idea. However, all members of the group must agree to support the final solution. So whatever the solution is that the group comes up with, everyone must agree on. That would be an example of the Bay of Pigs brainstorming session. As he said, it had to be unanimous. So consensus decision making. The group technique of majority rule, with which students are more familiar, encourages coalition building and produces temporary subgroups of winners and losers. In contrast, consensus decision making is a useful technique for ensuring that all members' views are considered, since all must agree. So let me give you an example. Two really good examples of why you should and should not, and the downside of majority rule. So many teachers will say, we'll do majority rules. If 51% of the group says that they want to do this, then that's fine. Well, if you do majority rules, then you create what are pretty much our politics, which is Democrat, Republican, and Tea Party, in which one party says, I'm going to force this bill through Congress, and the other party says, we're not going to let you, and then 50% approve the bill and 49% do not, and then 49% feel like they have lost. So when you do consensus decision making with majority rules, you create a subgroup of winners and losers. So if I ask you on an exam or just an assignment or whatever, why is majority rules not a good example of consensus building? Then you would say because it creates subgroups of winners and losers. Now, the second example I wanted to give you was the jury, the American jury. If you go on trial, I believe you have a jury of your peers, which is 12. That's right. It's not a jury of 3. That would leave an odd man out. So a jury of 12. And those jury members must get together and they must have a consensus on the verdict, which is unanimous. So whenever they leave the jury, they say, okay, we all decided, and there is no winner or loser, and everyone had to have their ideas together. And that, of course, brings in famous stories of juries agreeing and arguing and everything else. Some of y'all may have been on jury duty, and whenever you're on jury duty, you must agree with everyone in the room. And if one person says they don't agree, then the jury cannot end unless it becomes a hung jury, which the judge does not like doing. He'll say, y'all need to listen. You need to talk to each other. You need to come up with a consensus. There's the fun part of a jury is the judge tells them, he gives them a charge. And he says, he's like the school teacher. He says, okay, class, your job is to come up with a consensus verdict where you all agree. So they go into their little room, and they come back and they say, Your Honor, we respectfully tell you that we have 6 for and 6 against. We're split right down the middle. And he says, is there any way you can solve this? I would really like y'all to go back and have more discussion. So the jury sees it as we have to come up with consensus, and that's what we want. That is what we want, because a jury is not supposed to be split. If a jury is split, under our rules, they're supposed to discuss it until they're not split. Consensus decision making. So those are 2 techniques we can use when using groups. The second one would be decision making by ratings. By ratings. The technique of decision making by ratings requires that various choices of individuals in a group be weighted and averaged through ratings. The approach commits a group to accept the decisions that receive the best average rating from all members. It is an especially appropriate technique for resolving issues where several attractive alternatives exist, none of which has the support of a majority. I will give you a prime example of this: decision making by ratings. And you all probably have an idea. The beauty pageant. In a beauty pageant, 20 or 25 students from a school come out and they're dressed in real nice outfits. And they have really pretty dresses. And they come out and they stand in front of 3 or 4 judges. And they all, want to know who gets what ratings. Well, the judges do not go back into a room and have a consensus decision-making process. That may take all day. Could you imagine if the judge, after a beauty pageant, came out and said, "We cannot come up to a decision. We are a hung jury"? Then parents would be upset and say, "This isn't fair." So what does a beauty pageant judge do? They sit there with their ratings sheet and they fill out ratings individually of each person. And then the judges they all agree that whatever the ratings are, they will agree and abide by those rules. So therefore, a beauty pageant is judged by judges in a group manner. However, it's a decision making by ratings. So when they get together, they pull the scores together, and then they say, "Okay, well, Miss Beverly got first place according to the scores, and I agree because when I went into the meeting, when I went into this beauty pageant, I had agreed that whatever the ratings said is what I would go with." So that's what decision making by ratings. So we'll take a couple of notes real quick. It is where each group member rates the issue, and each group member agrees the ratings will be added or whatever formula you want to use, and a decision will be made. And more importantly, the rating system will be honored. So whatever the numbers are, and I'll just put this in parentheses, we will be true to the numbers. We will be agreeing with the numbers. So you see, a big element of this system is the agreement of the rating system. So you're already a step ahead of me because you already know this next topic. As a teacher and as a group, we need to set the formula before we start the work. We need to say, "Okay, folks, this is how we're going to rate them." In beauty pageants such as Miss Mississippi and Miss USA, the judges have to go to training sessions in which they have to understand the rating systems and agree upon those. Those are 3 small group techniques that work no matter, usually across the board, no matter how the students are selected. A special class of small group techniques that have been designed to achieve both cognitive and affective objectives under certain conditions is called cooperative learning. The term refers generally to grouping techniques in which students work together towards some common learning goal in small heterogeneous groups of usually 4 or 5 students. Heterogeneity typically includes characteristics such as gender, race, ethnicity, and ability. To be effective, cooperative learning requires that students have been shown how to cooperate. In addition, each member of the group must understand the role he or she is to play. Advocates of cooperative learning techniques assert that those techniques motivate students to do their best, to help one another, and organize their thinking through dialogue and elaboration. Johnson & Johnson in 1986 have summarized what they perceive to be the major differences between traditional and cooperative learning grouping techniques. They note that cooperative groups improve team building skills, foster interdependency, all for one and one for all, nurture individual accountability, and support group processing of information, whereas traditional types do not. So cooperative learning, or cooperative groups, is kind of a better way to do group projects. Cooperative learning models that include two critical characteristics: interdependency among group members and individual accountability. And these are shown to produce major factors in students' achievement. So as we look at the idea of, we've looked at this big term called cooperative learning. And let me make sure I get that term. Individual accountability. So the students are going to have to work together, and they'll also be accountable for their actions. Cooperative methods can and usually do have a positive effect on student achievement. Also, some researchers say that group rewards are essential and necessary for cooperative learning techniques. There must be a group goal. That can result in some form of recognition. But however, rewards should be separate from grades. The grading system should be tied to individual student progress. So, for example, if we're going to do a group project and we say, okay, we're going to have two groups, and this is a cooperative learning experience. The winning group receives 10 points on the next test. Well, that's not really good because we are rewarding academically an entire group. What we need is to have a reward for that group, such as mentioned in the school newspaper, such as they get to wear a star or they get a happy face or something like that. But then you need to grade the accountability of individual students. Although group work appears to be one of the answers to fostering cooperation among students, it can present some challenges. The workloads must be evenly assigned, and each student must be held responsible for the completion of his or her part. That having been said, however, a person's part for the group effort should be so critical as to be indispensable. If it is, and the student is unable or unwilling to perform, the group feels obligated to complete that person's work so that the group work will not fail. This situation is unfair. Having to shoulder someone else's work is the most common complaint heard among members of a heterogeneous group, especially by above average students and their parents. So, gifted students who have bad group work experience really do not like them because they've had to shoulder someone else's work. For an example, this problem newspaper contained requirements for both groups. Sorry. Structuring activities help students who are unfamiliar with cooperative learning become more at ease with the process. One popular activity that supports student interaction is think, pair, share. Teachers pair up students for a time-limited discussion of an issue. Student A shares with her partner for 2 minutes, and student B then does the same. Everyone has a voice, and what would have taken 60 minutes for a whole class round-robin discussion is done less than 5 minutes. So think, pair, share is where you say, what do y'all think about the Cuban Missile Crisis? Everyone think about it, pair up, and share. So this way, instead of having an entire group discuss, where one student stands up and says, here's what my idea is, and it takes them 1 minute, and then another student does that, everyone gets together and they get to hear each other's ideas. Think, pair, share. Let's now look at one technique that has received wide acclaim for social studies, and it is known as the jigsaw technique. Educators and psychologists working in the Austin, Texas schools in the post-integration 1970s to improve relationships among white, Hispanic, and black students devised a cooperative learning technique to reduce racial tensions. What happened was the teachers in this school district decided to create, they were having trouble with integration. And what they wanted to do was they wanted to create a school district that respected each other's needs and diversity. So a school that went segregated to integrated, the teacher realized that some of the students were having trouble understanding each other. So she wanted to bring the students together in cooperative learning. So she encouraged the students. So you think, well, cooperative learning is anything. She wanted the students to share and work together to break down the interpersonal barriers that have been created by years of integration. The jigsaw technique requires students to work in small interracial groups and share parts of a solution to a common challenge. The challenge generally was successfully performance on a quiz or assignment. Each member of the group was given only a very small amount of the pieces of the puzzle. No single member of the group was supplied with enough information to solve the problem alone. Only through sharing and relying on all the others in the group could each member succeed. At the conclusion of the exercise, all the group members took individual tests covering all the collective subject matter that had been shared. After the completion of the experimental program that used jigsaw, the investigators and the creators of this program reported that in integrated schools, whites learned equally well in both jigsaw and competitive classes. However, African Americans and Hispanics performed better in jigsaw classes than in non-jigsaw ones. Researchers said the black learners found the importance of the social context for learning to be a key factor for African American students. These students began the learning process by making a connection to colleagues. Jigsaw's group learning approach thrives on students caring that all members of the group learn and perform with excellence. Further, it was found that at the conclusion of the study, students liked both group mates and others in their class better than when the study began. So, the jigsaw technique created better students and a better social interaction among the students. This that I brought up discusses the jigsaw technique, and it's called the development of a jigsaw 4 in a secondary socialist classroom. There have been various jigsaw techniques pop up: jigsaw 1, jigsaw 2, and now we have jigsaw 4. So the article starts out with, the history of the cooperative learning at the elementary level is well documented. This publication also represents a continuation of a research conducted on Jigsaw 2 to the development of Jigsaw 4. So what is Jigsaw 2? One variation on the original Jigsaw that often is easier to implement is a socialist instruction was developed by John Hopkins. It was called the Jigsaw technique. It can be used with any subject matter, including conventional textbook passages, with little or no modifications. It provides more structured group roles and places more emphasis on the achievement of group goals than the original Jigsaw. The Jigsaw 2 scoring approach has been amended by your authors to reflect sensitivity for teacher workload. So let's continue this. And here's some key words right here. Cooperative learning, Jigsaw 2, social studies, Jigsaw 3, and Jigsaw 4. The development of Jigsaw 4. So let's go to the history part. It talks about Jigsaw 2. There are currently 3 types, it states, of Jigsaw strategies. The Jigsaw developed by E. Arison in 1978, Jigsaw 2, and Jigsaw 3 developed in 1994. Jigsaw and Jigsaw 2 differ only in the fact that team competition is allowed in Jigsaw 2. Team competition. The basic parts of the strategy are the same. Both have the students into groups and into teams. The teacher gives questions for the students to answer. The students leave their group and go to their team to answer the expert sheets or questions. They then return to their group with their expert sheets. In Jigsaw 2, the grades are averaged and the team with the best average score is reviewed. Jigsaw 3, developed by Straw in 1994, adds a whole group review process before the test, but then follows Jigsaw 2 for competition elements. So, Jigsaw 1, real basic idea of let's do some group work. Jigsaw 2, let's have a competition among the groups where we look at the test scores. Jigsaw 3, let's do all of that what Jigsaw 2 did with the test scores, but let's also add a group review before the test to find out what everyone thought about the group work. The 1995 research utilized post-research surveys, observation, and post-treatment interviewing of teachers and students. Data gathered identify the following concerns, and it talks about those. So let's see Jigsaw 4. And you'll notice that right there, Jigsaw 4 is the same. Step 1, introduction. They do an introduction. Step 2, expert sheets assigned to each group. Same as 2, same as 2. So they're doing the same with the expert sheets. They give out the sheets to the students. Groups answer expert questions prior to returning to home teams. Same. Step 4, and they add group Jigsaw 4, quiz on material in the expert groups checking for accuracy. So they add a quiz right here. Step 5, students return to home teams, sharing their information with teammates. Same. Then, quiz for Jigsaw 4. In step 7, Jigsaw 3 goes the review process, whole group by Jeopardy or Quiz Bowl. And then they have an individual exam. So, you see what Jigsaw 1 looks like in Jigsaw 2. is Jigsaw 1 and 2 talks about assigning the expert sheets to the students, then the groups answer, then the students return to the whole teams, then there's some individual project, and then there's a test. Simple as that. But Jigsaw 2 talks about a review process and a whole group review where everyone gets together and does kind of like a quiz show. And then you take the test scores and you reward to Jigsaw 2. So they have a whole group section right here that helps out. And Jigsaw 4 talks about implementing a quiz right here, and then a quiz right here. So they do more of a quiz, and then they talk about reteaching the material. So if you look at this article, there's really 4 jigsaw techniques. Jigsaw 1, no competition, everyone works together. Jigsaw 2, competition among groups. Jigsaw 3, competition among groups, just like Jigsaw 2. However, we're going to also add a whole group review process. And Jigsaw 4, this new one, discusses adding more quizzes and reviewing. So that's what they did. Let's look at their, this study does the Jigsaw 4, and let's see their findings. The outcome of this research and the development of Jigsaw 4 saw students' academic achievements and classroom demeanors improve. Jigsaw 4 addresses those concerns of the students and teachers who have utilized the cooperative learning strategy called Jigsaw 2. Classroom management was enhanced because peer pressure did not allow fellow students to enter the groups without pulling their weight or sharing their load. Students were not allowed to seek teacher assistance until they had exhausted all their teammates' knowledge concerning the subject. The teacher no longer was the sole possessor of knowledge, but the facilitator of the students' learning. Use of cooperative learning, and especially Jigsaw 4, allows teachers to offer their students an effective way of learning those skills need to be a functional citizen in a global community. And you can see the sources. And then they have a sample lesson plan. Another thing, so now you understand where Jigsaw 1, 2, 3, and 4 come together. And they're very fun. I wrote an article about the Jigsaw technique. I enjoyed it. Jigsaw is very fun to do, and it really helps the students out. Another idea is called the group investigation technique. So let's pull this up. In the group investigation technique, this is another cooperative learning strategy that has wide applicability in social studies instruction. In comparison to the Jigsaw technique, the group investigation strategy is open-ended and permits in-depth study of complex problems and issues. It affords considerable latitude in how the group defines and studies a topic and reports their findings. The technique requires students who have already learned to work effectively in groups. So we have 6 steps. Step 1 is identification of topics and choices by teachers and students. So we're asking big questions. So step 1 is identify the topic. So what do we want to study? What does my group want to investigate? Step 2 is formation of learning teams based on interest. Investigation of topics. Preparation of presentations. So, an example of how the strategy might be implemented in a social studies class would be the following. Let's say we're looking at the American Revolution. First, students would be divided into temporary brainstorming groups of 3 to 4, each charged with generating a list of questions one might ask in relation to the study of the Revolution. The entire class would compile a composite list of questions, which would be sorted into categories. Learning teams would include those who are particularly interested in investigating each category of questions. The teacher's role is to guide the formation of teams so that to the extent possible, each team includes a fair sampling of students. The learning teams review the questions in their category and pull together those questions most amenable to their investigation. They set the goals for the work and divide the task among themselves. Then they begin to study the topics that they have chosen. A representative from each learning team is delegated to a central coordinating committee to ensure that the team reports and presents the findings properly. Then, each group presents the findings. So, an example off the top of my head would be the Civil War. So you would say, okay, everyone, let's get into brainstorming and let's have some questions that we would like about the Civil War. So one would say, what was medicine like back then? Okay, so we would, medicine. And one would say, prisoners, how are prisoners treated? And someone would say, why did, who won? Who lost? Okay. How are the politics? All these are general topics. So from there, from our, we'd have maybe 30 or 40 brain topic questions, just pure brainstorming right there. So then we'd get together and we'd say, okay, the whole class would say, we need to create some common themes from this. Okay, so common themes would be, let's see, prisoners, and just, that would be life of a soldier. We look at the life of a soldier, just a common soldier. If he was captured, how was he treated? So life of a soldier. Let's see, politics. Let's look at that'd be just a general topic right there, politics and the politicians. The actual battles and strategy. And you can look at all kinds of topics. So those would be our 3 main topics. So you'd say, okay, class, from that, we've had all these questions that are derived from our thing. Let's get into our groups, and each group will then tackle each topic and go into research on that. And they do a quick research, or however long it takes, and then they present it to the group. So instead of the jigsaw technique where everyone gets a piece of the pie and they create the whole pie, each student is going after and finding their own, or what we call going down the rabbit hole. Each group goes down the rabbit hole and finds out what they want to find. I've seen this done very well, in which students are put into groups and taken to the library and they do research, and I've seen it done very well. And I've also seen this done very poorly. One example of being very poorly would be, you don't want to dwell on bad ones, but it was, I think, the teacher in question, I think he had printed a bunch of stuff off of Wikipedia and then created groups and said, who wants to research this? So then they would say, well, I want to research that. So he would just give them like 10 sheets of paper, and then they would research. And they'd read that, and they'd come up with a summary. It was kind of really bad. So you definitely want to have a good research component to that. Have them actually being able to go and do that. This is done a lot in college where graduate students get together and do quick research. You also need to be able to ask effective questions too. So those are our group projects, our cooperative learning styles we looked at. One thing that a teacher needs to be able to have is the ability to ask questions. Questions are an excellent motivational tool. If generated by the students, they are particularly powerful because they address something of special interest to the students. It has been the experience of some researchers that teachers often ask too many questions for students do not want to know the answers. Drawing students into the learning process requires interesting, reflective, meaningful questions. Teachers have a number of choices with respect to how they use questions to stimulate learning. Questions are the triggers of reflection. Type, duration, and sequencing of questions can significantly affect the level of interaction in learning. So just looking at the idea of questions. So you should think about the questions you are going to ask. Evidence suggests that a great number of the communications between teacher and students consist of questions and answers. More often than not, teachers initiate the questions, read them from text, or assign them in writing to students. Questions are used extensively in both large and small group instruction. Effective questioning can focus attention on the important objectives of a lesson or activity. They can also encourage students to participate in discussions and move thinking in a systematic fashion. Questions can also open new avenues of exploration for teachers and students alike. Questions that originate from students during instruction, in addition to being vehicles for research, would appear to be especially helpful for identifying areas that are unclear, need amplification, or were neglected by the teacher's planning. Patterns of effective questioning. Provoke attention. Assess state of students' knowledge. Trigger recall of other material. Manage instruction. Redirect attention. And they bring out feelings. Such as, and that's what you want. You're wanting good, strong questions. Just as with grouping techniques, teachers have a number of decisions to make regarding the use of questions in instruction. The type, duration, sequencing of questions can significantly affect the level of interaction, thinking, and learning that results from instruction. Effective questioning techniques can focus attention on the important objectives of a lesson or activity. They can also encourage students to participate in discussions and move thinking along in a systematic fashion. Teachers can draw on a store of tested principles and strategies. Some techniques associated with effective questioning apply to all questions, such as the efficient use of time, selection, and sequencing. Sequencing is a part of the process of developing a set or script of questions in advance of teaching and learning. A question script is a basic set of questions that have been constructed, rehearsed, and logically sequenced prior to their use in a lesson or activity. Rehearsal refers to the process of whereby a teacher reflects on exactly how the questions will be phrased. They are then put in the correct order in the lesson or activity. So, the point of this talking about is when you're doing group work, when you're doing any kind of instruction, and you're trying to motivate students, you definitely want to have a good sequence of questions. And to have a good sequence of questions, you need to be able to have those scripted out possibly. So think about questions before you ask them, which is very important. We've learned a lot in this lecture. Just doing a quick review. We've looked at general cooperative learning techniques. We examined the concept of, going back, of what, just three basic types of cooperative work, of small group work. We looked at brainstorming, consensus decision making, and decision making by ratings. We also briefly, or not really briefly, discussed how we should select our groups and how group size is very important as well. We then looked at the concept of cooperative learning, which is bigger than group work. We looked at the jigsaw technique, and we looked at jigsaw 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then we looked at consensus group making. We looked at group investigation, which is where they go in and they try to decide that. And then we looked at just real briefly about asking good questions. So hopefully you learned a lot from this lecture. And with that said, we will take a pause and I'll take another lecture. Have a good day.